But Raskolnikov had gone straight to the house on the canal where Sonia lived. It was a 3-story building, old and green-coloured. He tracked the yard-keeper down and received from him some imprecise directions as to where Kapernaumov, the tailor, lived. Having discovered in one corner of the courtyard the entrance to a dark, narrow flight of stairs, he went up to the second floor and came out onto a gallery that ran right round the building, overlooking the courtyard. While he was wandering about in the darkness, puzzled as to where the entrance to Kapernaumov's apartment might be, only 2 or 3 paces away from him a door suddenly opened. Without thinking, he seized at it. "Who is it?" a female voice asked uneasily. "It's me. I came to see you," Raskolnikov answered, and he entered the tiny hallway. There, on a chair with a broken seat, in a crooked brass candlestick, stood a candle. "It's you! Oh, merciful Lord!" Sonia said with a faint scream, and she froze, petrified. "Which way's your room? In here?" And Raskolnikov, trying to avoid her eyes, quickly went into her room. A moment later Sonia herself came in, set up the candle and stood facing him, completely taken aback, in a state of inexpressible agitation, and all too plainly alarmed by his unexpected visit. The colour suddenly rushed to her pale features, and tears flooded to her eyes. She felt sick, embarrassed, and gratified. Raskolnikov quickly turned away and sat down on a chair at the table. He managed to take in the room with a cursory glance. It was a large room, but very low-ceilinged, and only one rented out by the Kapernaumovs, the locked door to whose apartment was situated in the wall on the left. On the other side of the room, in the wall on the right, there was another door, which was always kept tightly bolted. This led to another apartment, the one next door, which had a different number. Sonia's room resembled some sort of barn, possessing the form of a highly irregular rectangle, and this gave it a misshapen appearance. A wall with 3 windows that looked out onto the canal somehow cut the room transversely, so that one of its corners, forming a horribly acute angle, ran off into the depths somewhere, and in the faint light one could not even make it out properly. The angle of the other corner was, on the other hand, quite hideously obtuse. The whole of this large room contained hardly any furniture. In the right-hand corner was the bed. Beside it, closer to the door, was a chair. Against the same wall where the bed was, right by the door, into the next-door apartment, stood a plain wooden table that was covered with a blue tablecloth. At the table stood 2 wicker chairs. Finally, against the other wall, near the acute-angled corner, was a small chest of drawers made of simple timber, practically lost in the emptiness. That was all there was in the room. The yellowish, shabby, peeling wallpaper had turned black in all the corners. The air must have been damp and fume-ridden here in the winter. The signs of poverty were everywhere, and there were not even any curtains over the bed. Without saying anything, Sonia looked at this guest of hers, who had studied her room so closely, and with so little ceremony, and at last she began to tremble with fear, as though she was standing before the judge and arbiter of her destiny. "I'm sorry it's late. It must be after 11, isn't it?" he asked, still without raising his eyes to her. "Yes," Sonia murmured. "Oh, yes, it is," she said, suddenly, in a hurry, as though this were for her the end of the matter. "The landlord's clock chimed just now. I heard it. It's past 11. "This is the last time I shall be visiting you," Raskolnikov went on darkly, although this was actually the first time he had ever called on her. "I may not see you again." "Are you going somewhere?" "I don't know. I'll find out everything tomorrow." "So you won't be at Katerina Ivanovna's tomorrow?" Sonia said with a quiver in her voice. "I don't know. I'll know it all tomorrow morning. That's not why I'm here. I've come to tell you something." He brought his thoughtful gaze up to meet hers, and suddenly noticed that he was seated while she continued to stand facing him. "Why are you standing up? Sit down," he said, in a voice that had swiftly altered. A quiet, caressing voice. She sat down. For a moment he gave her a friendly look that was almost one of compassion. "How thin you are. Look at that hand of yours. One can see right through it. Your fingers are like a corpse's." He took her hand, and Sonia smiled faintly. "I've always been like this," she said. "Even when you lived at home?" "Yes." "Yes, I suppose you have," he said abruptly, and his facial expression and tone of voice again swiftly altered. Again he looked around him. "You rent this place from Kapanamov?" "Yes, sir." "What about the people through the door? Do they rent from him too?" "Yes, they have a room like this one." "All of them in the same room?" "Yes, sir." "I'd be scared in here at nights," he observed darkly. "The landlord and landlady are very good, very affectionate to me," Sonia replied, still somehow not quite with all her wits about her, still unsure of the situation. "All the furniture, everything, it all belongs to them. Oh, they're very kind, and their children often come to see me." "Are they the ones who can't speak properly?" "That's right, sir. He has a stammer, and he's lame too. His wife's that way as well. She hasn't actually got a stammer, but she can't get her words out properly. She's kind, very. And he's a former house serf. They've got 7 children. Only the eldest one has a stammer. The others are simply ill, and they don't stammer. But how do you know about them?" she added with some astonishment. "Your father told me all about them before he died. He told me all about you, about how you'd go out at 6 and come back at 9, and about how Katerina Ivanovna used to kneel beside your bed." Sonia was covered with embarrassment. "I thought I saw him today," she whispered uncertainly. "Who?" "My father. I was walking along the street down there near this building on the corner, and he seemed to be walking ahead of me. It really did look like him. I was just about to call on Katerina Ivanovna." "You were off duty?" "Yes," Sonia whispered abruptly, again covered in embarrassment, and with her eyes lowered. "Katerina Ivanovna used to beat you when you lived with the family, didn't she?" "No. Why do you say that? Why do you say that? No," Sonia said, looking at him with fright. "So you love her, do you?" "Love her? Of course," Sonia said, drawing the word out piteously, and suddenly clasping her hands in suffering. "Oh, you don't know her. If only you knew her. I mean, she's just like a child. I mean, she's nearly gone insane with unhappiness. And how clever she used to be. How magnanimous. How kind. You don't know anything. Oh." Sonia had said this as though she were in despair, frantic with suffering, and wringing her hands. Her pale cheeks had flared with colour again, and her eyes expressed torment. It was clear that a terrible number of things that had been stirred up in her, there was something she terribly wanted to express, to say out loud, to plead for. A kind of voracious compassion, if it might be put that way, was suddenly displayed in every feature of her face. "Beat me? But why do you say that? Beat me? Oh, merciful Lord! And what if she did beat me? What then? What does it matter? You don't know anything. Anything. She's so unhappy. Oh, so unhappy. And ill. She's looking for justice and truth. She's so pure. She believes there must be justice in everything, and she demands it. And even if you were to torture her, she wouldn't do something that was unjust. She herself simply isn't aware that it's impossible for there to be justice and truth among people, and she gets upset. Like a child. Like a child. She's so truthful." "And what's going to become of you?" Sonia gave him a questioning look. "I mean, you're their main support now. You were their support before, too, and your father used to come and ask you for money so he could treat his hangover. Well, what's going to happen now?" "I don't know," Sonia said sadly. "Will they stay where they are?" "I don't know. They're behind with the rent on that place, but apparently the landlord told them today that she's going to banish them from the doorstep, and Katerina Ivanovna herself says she doesn't want to stay there another minute." Why the pretence of bravery? Is she putting her hope in you? Oh, don't say such things. We live as one, in harmony, Sonia said, growing frantic again, even showing signs of irritation, for all the world in the way a canary or some other small bird might lose its temper if it could. I mean, what is she to do? She asked, growing angry and excited. And how she wept today! Oh, how she wept! Her mind's growing confused. Haven't you noticed? She's growing confused. At one moment she's worrying like a little girl about everything being just right tomorrow, with the proper snacks and everything. At the next she's wringing her hands, spitting blood and weeping, and suddenly she starts beating her head against the wall as though she were in despair. And then she gets over it again, and she puts all her hope in you. She says you're her helping hand now, and she's going to borrow some money from somewhere and take me back to her hometown with her and start a boarding school for girls from good families and hire me as one of the teachers. And a completely new and wonderful life will open up for us. And she kisses me, embraces me, consoles me. And I mean, she really believes it. She really believes those fantasies of hers. Well, how can one contradict her? And all day today she's been washing, cleaning, mending. She's dragged the wash trough into the room herself and with her feeble energies and collapsed on the bed, gasping for breath. And she and I went to the Row this morning to buy shoes for Lena and Polechka because their old ones are falling to pieces. Only we'd underestimated the amount they'd cost, underestimated by a very long way. And she'd had her eye on such a lovely little pair of shoes because she has taste. You simply don't know. She burst into tears right there in the shop in front of the owners because she didn't have enough. Oh, how pitiful it was to see her. Well, now you've told me that, I can understand why you live like this, Raskolnikov said with a bitter, ironic smile. But don't you feel sorry for her? Don't you? Sonia said, hurling herself towards him again. I mean, I know you gave her the last money you had, but you hadn't seen anything. If you had, oh, merciful Lord, oh, how many, many times I've brought her to tears. And that evening last week, too. What could I have been thinking of? Only a week before his death. How cruelly I behaved, and how many, many times that has happened. Oh, and then, just as now, I would go through the agony of thinking about it all day. As she spoke, Sonia actually wrung her hands at the pain of the reflection. You mean you're the one who was cruel? Yes, I was. That evening when I arrived, she continued, weeping, my father said, read to me, Sonia. My head's aching. Read to me. Here, I've a book. He had some book or other. He must have got it from Andrei Semyonich. And that's Mr. Lebzyanatnikov, who lives near here. He was always getting hold of such amusing books. But I told him it was late. I had to be going, so I couldn't read to him. I'd only dropped in to show Katerina Ivanovna some lace collars. Lizaveta, the market woman, had brought me some lace collars and armlets at a low price. Good ones they were, new, with patterns. Katerina Ivanovna thought they were marvellous, and she put them on and looked at herself in the mirror. Oh, she thought they were quite wonderful. Please let me have them, Sonia, she said. She even said please. That's how much she wanted them. But what would she have done with them? It was simply that they reminded her of her earlier, happier days. She looked at herself in the mirror, admiring herself, and I mean, she doesn't have one single dress, not a single one. She hasn't had anything of her own for heaven knows how many years, and she'd never ask anyone for anything. She's proud. She'd rather give away the last one she owned, and here she was asking. So wonderful she did think they were. But I was sorry to part with them. What would you be doing with those, Katerina Ivanovna? I asked. That was how I said it. What would you be doing with those? I shouldn't have said that to her. She gave me a terrible look because I'd really hurt her that I'd said no to her. And it was so pitiful to see. I mean, it wasn't the collars she was hurt about, but the fact that I'd said no. I could see it. Oh, if only I could. I think I'd take it all back. Undo it all of what I'd said that evening. What a miserable person I am. But what's the use? I mean, why should you care? Did you know that Lizaveta woman? The one who ran the market stall? Yes, I did. Did you? Sonia asked, with a certain degree of surprise. Katerina Ivanovna has incurable consumption. She's going to die soon, Raskolnikov said after a moment's silence, without answering her question. "Oh, no, no, no!" Sonia cried, and with an unconscious gesture she seized him by both hands, as though begging him to say it was not true. "But I mean, it's better if she dies," he said. "No, it's not. It's not better. It's not better at all," she kept repeating, frightened and without any control. "What about the children? Where will you take them if not here, with you?" "Oh, I don't know," Sonia screamed, almost in despair, and she clutched at her head. It was evident that this thought had fleetingly occurred to her on many, many occasions, and that he had startled it into life again. "Well, and what if you were to fall ill even now, while Katerina Ivanovna is still alive, and you were taken to hospital? What would happen then?" he said, pressing on without mercy. "Oh, stop it, that's not possible," Sonia shrieked, and her face was twisted with a terrible panic. "What do you mean, not possible?" Raskolnikov continued, with a hard, ironic smile. "You're not insured, are you? So what would happen to them? You'd all be out in the street, the whole gang of you. She'd be coughing and begging and beating her head against a wall somewhere, as she did today, and the children would be crying. And then she'd collapse and be taken to the police station, the hospital. She'd die, and the children—" "No, God won't let it happen," were the words that finally broke from Sonia's constricted chest. She was listening, looking at him in supplication, looking at him and clasping her hands in a speechless plea, as though all depended on him. Raskolnikov got up and began to pace about the room. About a minute went by. Sonia stood with her arms dropped and her head lowered, in terrible anguish. "Can't you save some money? Put something by for when you need it?" he asked, stopping suddenly in front of her. "No," Sonia whispered. "I dare say not. But have you tried?" he added, with something very close to mockery. "Yes, I have." "And it didn't work out? Well, that's that, I suppose. There's no point in my even asking, is there?" And again he began to pace about the room. About another minute went by. "You don't earn every day, I hope?" Sonia grew even more embarrassed than she had been previously, and the colour again rushed to her face. "No," she whispered, with an agonized effort. "I expect the same thing will happen to Polya," he said suddenly. "No, no, it's not possible. No," Sonia screamed, like a soul in despair, or as though someone had just stuck a knife into her. God wouldn't let anything so dreadful happen." "He lets it happen to other people." No, God will look after her. He will," she said, beside herself. "But there may not be any God," Raskolnikov replied, with a kind of malicious satisfaction, gave a laugh and looked at her. Sonia's face suddenly changed in a most terrible manner. It was crossed by convulsive spasms. She glanced at him with a look of inexpressible reproach, made as if to say something, but could not get the words out, and instead suddenly began to sob with the utmost bitterness, covering her face with her hands. "You say that Katerina Ivanovna's mind's growing confused. It's your own that is," he said after a pause. Some 5 minutes passed. He kept pacing to and fro, not saying a word and not looking at her. At last he went over to her. His eyes were glittering. He took her by the shoulders with both hands and looked straight into her weeping face. His gaze was dry, inflamed, and sharp. His lips were quivering violently. With sudden rapidity he stooped, and getting down on the floor, kissed her foot. Sonia jerked back from him in horror, as from a madman. And indeed he really did look like a man who was wholly insane. "Why are you doing that? Why are you doing it? In front of me?" she muttered, her face now pale, and suddenly her heart was wrung with utter agony. He immediately got up. "It wasn't you I was buying to, but the whole of human suffering," he said, almost savagely, and went over to the window. "Listen," he added, coming back to her after a moment or two. "I told an insulting fellow earlier today that he wasn't worth your little finger, and that I'd done my sister an honour by making her sit next to you." "Oh, why did you tell him that? And in her presence too?" Sonia exclaimed in fear. "Sitting with me? An honour? But I mean, I don't have any honour. Oh, why did you say that?" "I said it about you not because of your sin or your dishonour, but because of your great suffering. And as for your being a great sinner, that's simply a fact," he added, almost beside himself. "And you're even more of a sinner because you've mortified and betrayed yourself for nothing. Isn't that monstrous? Isn't it monstrous that you're living in this filth which you hate and loathe, while all the time you know you have only to open your eyes, that you're neither helping nor saving anyone by it? And I mean, tell me," he said in a near frenzy, "how much turpitude and vileness can exist in you alongside these other opposing and holy emotions? I mean, it would be more just, 1,000 times more just, and more reasonable to throw yourself headfirst in the water and have done with it." "But what would become of them?" Sonia asked faintly, giving him a look of suffering, but at the same time apparently not at all taken aback by what he had suggested. Raskolnikov looked at her strangely. From her gaze alone he surmised everything. So it was true. She really had that idea. It was quite possible that she had seriously, many times, considered the best way of having done with it, so seriously that now she was not really astonished at his suggestion. She had not even noticed how cruel were the things he had been saying to her. Neither, of course, had she realized the true meaning of his reproaches and of the peculiar view he took of her turpitude, and this was plain to him. But he fully understood the degree of monstrous agony with which, for a long time now, the thought of her dishonoured and shameful position had tormented her. What was it, he wondered? What was it that had, until now, reined in her determination to have done with it? And only now did he fully comprehend what those poor little orphaned children meant to her, and that pitiful, half-insane Katerina Ivanovna with her consumption and her beating of her head against the wall. Even so, it was obvious to him that Sonia, possessing the character she did, with the education which, in spite of everything, she had managed to obtain, would not possibly stay like this. Yet the question would not go away. How could she have stayed in this untenable position for so very long without going mad, since she was unable to throw herself in the water? Of course, he was aware that the social position Sonia found herself in was one that depended on factors of chance, although, unfortunately, it was far from being unique or exceptional. He felt, however, that it was this very element of chance, this, together with a certain degree of education, and the kind of life she had led in the past, which one might have supposed would have crushed her at the very step she had taken along this loathsome road. What had preserved her? Not lust, surely. It was quite evident that all this turpitude affected her only mechanically. Not one drop of genuine lust had as yet penetrated her heart. He could see this. She stood before him exposed in her reality. There are 3 ways open to her, he thought. She can either jump in the canal, end up in a madhouse, or throw herself at last into a life of depravity which will stultify her mind and turn her heart to stone. He found this last notion the most repugnant of the 3, but by now he was a sceptic. He was young, detached, and therefore cruel, and so he could not avoid concluding that the last way out, depravity in other words, was the most probable one. Can it really be true, he exclaimed to himself, can it really be that this creature, who still retains her purity of spirit, will at last be consciously drawn into that loathsome, stinking pit? Can it be that the process of induction has already begun? Can it also be that the only reason she has been able to hold out so long is because vice no longer seems repugnant to her? No, that's not possible, he exclaimed, as Sonia had done just then. No, what has held her back from the canal so long is her consciousness of sin, and them, the others. If for so long she's prevented herself from going mad, but who can be sure that she hasn't gone mad? Is she really in her right mind? Do people in their right minds talk the way she does? Do people in their right minds produce the kind of arguments she does? Is it acceptable for her to sit on the brink of ruin the way she does, right on the edge of the stinking pit into which she's already being drawn, fending one off, shutting her ears when one warns her of the danger she's in? What is she up to? Is it a miracle she's waiting for? Yes, that's probably what it is. And these are not the signs of madness? He seized stubbornly on this thought. It was the explanation that appealed to him more than any other. He began to study her more fixedly. So you say a lot of prayers to God, do you, Sonia? He asked her. Sonia said nothing. He stood next to her, waiting for a reply. What would I be without God? She whispered quickly, with energy, hurling the gaze of her suddenly flashing eyes at him, and she gripped his hand tightly in her own. Yes, I was right, he thought. And what does God do for you in return? He asked, probing further. For a long time Sonia said nothing, as if she were unable to reply. Her feeble chest was heaving with excitement. That's enough. Don't ask such questions. You don't deserve an answer, she exclaimed suddenly, looking at him severely and angrily. Yes, I was right. I was right, he said, emphatically to himself. He does everything, she whispered quickly, lowering her eyes again. So that's the way out she's chosen. And there's the explanation for it too, he decided to himself, examining her with avid curiosity. It was with a new, strange, almost morbid sensation that he studied this pale, thin, and irregularly angular little face. These meek blue eyes that were able to flash with such fire, such severe energy and emotion, this little body that was still shivering with indignation and anger, and it all began to seem stranger and stranger to him, almost impossible. She's a holy fool. A holy fool, he kept saying to himself, over and over again. On the chest of drawers lay a book. Each time he had paced up and down the room it had caught his attention. Now he picked it up and looked at it. It was a New Testament in Russian translation. The book was an old one, second-hand, in a leather binding. Where did that come from? He called to her across the room. She was still standing in the same spot, some 3 paces from the table. It was brought to me, she replied with seeming reluctance, not looking at him. By whom? Lizaveta. I asked her to. Lizaveta, that's peculiar, he thought. He was beginning to find everything about Sonia more peculiar and more wonderful with every minute that passed. He took the book over to the candle and began to leaf through its pages. Where's the bit about Lazarus? He asked suddenly. Sonia was looking stubbornly at the floor and did not answer. She was standing a little to one side of the table. Where's the bit about raising Lazarus? Find it for me, Sonia. She gave him a sideways look. You're looking in the wrong place. It's in the 4th Gospel, she whispered severely, making no move towards him. Find it and read it to me, he said. Then he sat down at the table, leaned on it with one elbow, propped his head on his hand, and stared gloomily to one side, preparing to listen. Come to the 7th first. In 3 weeks' time, you'll be most welcome. I think I'll be there myself, if I'm not in an even worse place, he muttered to himself. Sonia stepped uncertainly over to the table, having listened with suspicion to Raskolnikov's strange request. Haven't you ever read it? She asked, glancing at him across the table without much trust. A long time ago when I was at school. Go on, read it. Haven't you heard it in church? I don't go, do you? No, whispered Sonia. Raskolnikov gave her an ironic smile. I understand. I suppose that means you won't be at your father's funeral tomorrow. Oh, I will. I went to church last week as well, for another funeral. Whose? Lizaveta's. Someone murdered her with an axe. His nerves were growing more and more on edge. His head began to go round. You are friendly with Lizaveta? Yes, she was a righteous woman. She used to come. Seldom. It was difficult for her. She and I used to read and talk. She will see God. These bookish words sounded strange to his ears, and here was another piece of news. There had been some sort of mysterious get-togethers with Lizaveta. Holy fools, the two of them. I'll be turning into a holy fool myself soon. It's catching, he thought. Go on, read it, he exclaimed suddenly, in a pressing, irritated voice. Sonia was still wavering. Her heart was beating violently. For some reason she did not dare to read to him. In a state approaching agony, he looked at the wretched madwoman. What do you want me to read it for? I mean, you don't believe in God, do you? She whispered quietly, almost panting. Read it. I really want you to, he insisted. You read it for Lizaveta, after all. Sonia opened the book and found the passage. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was not up to it. Twice she began, yet could not articulate the first syllable. Now, a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, she got out at last with an effort. But suddenly, when she reached the fourth word, her voice twanged and then broke like a string that had been stretched too taut. Her breathing was cut off and her chest was constricted. Raskolnikov partly understood why Sonia could not prevail on herself to read to him, and the more he understood, the more bluntly and irritably he insisted that she do so. He could imagine only too well how hard it was now for her to give away and reveal everything that was her. He knew that these feelings really did constitute, as it were, her most genuine and possibly oldest secret, one that she might have nurtured from her girlhood, from the time when she had still been living with her family in the presence of her luckless father and her grief-crazed stepmother, among the hungry children, the hideous shrieks, the reprimands. At the same time, however, he knew now, and knew for a fact, that even though she was miserably unhappy and horribly afraid of something as she now began to read, at the same time she had an agonizing desire to read to him, in spite of all her misery and fear, and that it was him she wanted to read to make sure that he heard it, and that she wanted it to be now. However, things may turn out later on. This he read in her eyes, deduced from her rapturous excitement. She mastered herself, suppressed the spasm in her throat, which had cut off her voice at the beginning of the verse, and continued to read the 11th chapter of the Gospel according to St. John, until she reached verse 19. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. At this point she stopped again, sensing with embarrassment that her voice was going to tremble and break off again. Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? She saith unto him, and taking a new breath, apparently in pain, Sonia read distinctly and forcefully, as though she herself were confessing her creed for all to hear, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. She made as if to stop, quickly raised her eyes to him, but soon mastered herself again and began to read on. Raskolnikov sat listening motionlessly without turning round, propping his elbow on the table and looking to one side. They reached verse 32. Then, when Mary was come where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit, and was troubled, and said, Where have ye laid him? They said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? Raskolnikov turned round to face her and looked at her in excitement. Yes, he had been right. She was shaking all over in a real, genuine fever. He had been expecting this. She was approaching the description of the great and unprecedented miracle, and a sense of immense triumph had taken hold of her. Her voice had become as resonant as metal. Triumph and joy sounded in it, giving it strength. The lines swam before her, for her eyes were growing dim, but she knew by heart what she was reading. At the verse she had just read, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind... She lowered her voice, then ardently and passionately conveyed the doubt, reproaches and abuse of the unbelievers, the unseeing Jews, who presently, in a moment, would fall as though struck by a thunderbolt, sobbing and attaining belief. And he also blinded and unbelieving, he too will hear it in a moment. He too will come to believe. Yes, now this very minute, she thought in her dream, and she shook with joyful expectation. Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. She stressed the word 4 with great energy. Jesus saith unto her, Said I not unto you that if you wouldst believe, thou shouldst see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth. She read loudly and ecstatically, shaking and shivering, as though she was seeing it in real life. Bound, hand and foot, with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him, and let him go. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary, and had seen the things which Jesus did, believed on him. Further she did not read, nor was she able to, closed the book and quickly got up from her chair. That's all there is about raising of Lazarus, she whispered sternly and abruptly, and stood unmoving, turned away to one side, not daring to raise her eyes to him, as though she were embarrassed. Her feverish shaking still continued. The stop of candle had long been guttering in its crooked candlestick within that wretched room, shedding its dim light on the murderer and the prostitute who had so strangely encountered each other in the reading of the eternal book. Some 5 minutes or more went by. I've come to talk about some business with you, Raskolnikov suddenly said, in a loud voice, frowning. He got up and went over to Sonia. Sonia raised her eyes to him without saying anything. His gaze was particularly stern, and it contained a kind of wild determination. I deserted my family today, he said. My mother and sister. I shan't see them any more. I've severed my links with them. Why? Sonia asked, as though stunned. Her recent meeting with his mother and sister had left a deep impression on her, though it was one she could not define. She greeted this news of a severing of links with something approaching horror. You're all I've got now, he added. Let's be off. I've come to you. We're cursed together, so let's take the road together. His eyes were glittering. Like a man insane, Sonia thought in her turn. Where to? She asked in fear, and took a step back in spite of herself. How should I know? All I know is that it must be the same road, towards the same goal. She looked at him in total incomprehension. All she could see was that he was horribly, infinitely unhappy. None of them would understand if you were to tell them, he went on, but I've understood. You're necessary to me, and that's why I've come to you." "I don't understand," Sonia whispered. "You'll understand later on. You've done the same thing after all, haven't you? You've also stepped across. Found it in yourself to step across. You've committed moral suicide. You've wrecked a life, your own. It's all the same. You might have lived a life of reason and the spirit, but you'll end up in the Haymarket. But you won't be able to endure it, and if you remain alone, you'll go mad like me. You're like a mad woman even now. That means we must go together along the same road. Let's be off." Why are you saying this?" Sonia said, made strangely and restlessly uneasy by his words. "Why? Because you can't go on like this, that's why. You must finally confront things seriously and directly, and not weep and wail like a child about God not letting it happen. I mean, what would happen if you were to be carted off to hospital tomorrow? That mad consumptive woman will die soon, and what will happen to the children? Do you think Polya won't go down the slippery slope? Have you seen the children on the street corners round here, those whose mothers have sent them out to beg for alms? I know the sort of places those mothers live in, the sort of conditions they're surrounded by. In those places it's impossible for children to remain children. In those places a 7-year-old is a depraved thief. And yet children are the image of Christ. For such is the kingdom of heaven. He commanded us to revere them and love them. They're the humanity of the future. But what then? What's to be done? Sonia said, weeping hysterically and wringing her hands. What's to be done? To break what has to be broken, once and for always, that's all, and to take the suffering upon oneself. What? You don't understand? You will later on. Liberty and power, but above all, power. Over all trembling mortals, and over the whole ant-heap. There's your goal. Remember that. That's my parting message. This may be the last time I shall ever speak to you again. If I don't come back tomorrow, you'll hear all about it for yourself, and then I want you to remember those words I spoke to you just now, and perhaps some day later on, after years of experience, you'll understand what they mean. But if I do come back tomorrow, I'll tell you who murdered Lizaveta. Goodbye. Sonia shuddered with fright. You mean you know who murdered her? She asked, going numb with horror and staring at him wildly. I know, and I'll tell you. You I'll tell, and you alone. I've singled you out. I won't come to ask you to forgive me. I'll simply tell you. I singled you out a long time ago as the person to tell this to. I thought of it back at the time when your father spoke about you and when Lizaveta was still alive. Goodbye. Don't give me your hand. Until tomorrow. He went out. Sonia watched him go as though he were a man insane. But she herself was like a woman insane, and she knew it. Her head was spinning. Oh, merciful Lord! How does he know who murdered Lizaveta? What was the meaning of those things he said? This is terrible. But at the same time, the thought never entered her head. Not on any account. Any account. Oh, he must be terribly unhappy. He's deserted his mother and sister. Why? What had happened? And what plans were in his head? What had he said to her? He'd kissed her foot and said, yes, he'd said it quite distinctly, that he couldn't live without her. Oh, merciful Lord! Sonia spent the entire night with a high temperature and delirium. From time to time she'd leap up weeping and wringing her hands, and then relapse into a feverish slumber in which she dreamt of Polya, Katerina Ivanovna, Lizaveta, her reading of the New Testament, and him with his pale face, his burning eyes. He was kissing her feet, weeping. Oh, merciful Lord! Behind the door on the right, the very same door that divided Sonia's room from the apartment of Gertruda Karlovna Resslich, was an intermediate room which had long stood empty, belonged to Mrs. Resslich's apartment, and was up for rent, a fact attested to by notices on the front gate and stickers in the windows that gave on to the canal. Sonia had long been used to thinking of this room as unoccupied. Yet all this time, by the door of the empty room, Mr. Svidrigailov had been standing, keeping quiet and listening. When Raskolnikov went out, he stood for a moment pondering, then tiptoed back to his own room, which adjoined the empty one, got a chair, and carried it right up to the door that led into Sonia's room. The conversation had struck him as interesting and important, and he had enjoyed it very, very much. So much so, in fact, that he had brought in a chair, so that on any future occasion, such as tomorrow, for example, he would not have to sustain the rigours of standing up for a whole hour, but could make himself a little more comfortable, in order that his enjoyment might be complete in every respect.